Before maps gave it a name, before empires drew borders around its banks, before engineers tried to discipline its currents with concrete and law, the Colorado River was ancient beyond imagination. Not ancient in the human sense, not ancient like a kingdom or a monument, but ancient in the language of stone, where time is counted in vanished oceans, rising mountains, and continents that moved like collisions of destiny. To stand beside this river is to stand beside a survivor from a world that no human being was ever meant to witness. A remnant of forces so immense that civilization itself begins to look like dust resting briefly on the skin of the earth. At first glance, the Colorado seems almost impossible. A river threading through deserts. A ribbon of life moving through red rock, heat, silence, and emptiness. But that image hides the deeper truth. This river did not simply flow through the American West. It helped create it. It carved abysses large enough to humble empires. It exposed pages of geological history so vast that they shattered humanity's belief that the Earth was only a few thousand years old. In its canyons, the planet opened its body and revealed a deeper past than myth, scripture, or memory had ever imagined. Long before there was a river, there was violence. More than 4 billion years ago, Earth itself was a furnace of impact and fire, born from cosmic debris circling a young sun. Continents did not yet resemble continents. Oceans appeared, vanished, and returned. Mountains rose from buried seas. Ancient crust folded, cracked, drowned, and lifted again. The land that would one day become the Colorado Plateau passed through impossible transformations, assembled from fragments of older worlds. Beneath the river's modern path lies a buried archive of planetary upheaval. Marine sediments from vanished inland seas, dunes turned to stone, volcanic ash, fossilized shorelines, and basement rock forged in an age so remote it reaches back toward the earliest chapters of Earth's existence. And yet, for millions of years, even that was not enough. Because the greatest mystery is not simply how old this landscape is, but how this river became powerful enough to cut through it. That question haunted scientists for generations. Rivers usually obey the land. They follow weakness, detour around resistance, surrender to mountains. The Colorado did something stranger. It crossed uplifted rock, sliced downward through rising plateaus, and opened the Grand Canyon, one of the most astonishing geological wounds on Earth. It looked less like a passive stream and more like an argument between water and stone, carried on over unthinkable spans of time. The old world could not understand such a place. Early explorers saw grandeur. Indigenous peoples saw memory, spirit, danger, and survival. Settlers saw opportunity, but geologists saw a threat to certainty. Every layer of canyon wall seemed to whisper the disturbing message: human history is almost nothing. Entire civilizations could rise, flourish, collapse, and vanish, while the river performed only a fraction of its labor. In those exposed cliffs were not decades or dynasties, but epochs. Here were deserts older than nations, seas older than language, rocks formed long before animals, forests, or even complex life had appeared. The Colorado River was not merely a landscape feature. It was evidence against human arrogance. That is why this story matters. Not because the river is beautiful, though it is. Not because it shaped the American Southwest, though it did. It matters because the Colorado River became one of the great instruments through which Earth revealed its hidden scale. It forced humanity to confront a terrifying idea: that the world was not designed around us, not measured for our lifetimes, not built to fit our myths. And if one river could expose all of that, what else had we misunderstood about time, history, and our place inside this older, more violent planet? To understand the Colorado River, we have to abandon the timescale of human instinct. We think in lifetimes, reigns, generations, elections, wars. The river thinks in erosion, uplift, climate shifts, and tectonic patience. Its true story begins not with boats or dams, but with a continent being rearranged from below. Deep, beneath Western North America, forces inside the Earth were bending, stretching, and lifting the crust. What looked solid from the surface was unstable, rising slowly over millions of years. The Colorado Plateau rose high without being shattered, preserving layers of ancient rock like a library lifted toward the sky. That uplift changed everything. Height gave water gravity. Gravity gave water force. But force alone does not explain the miracle. One of the scientific debates surrounding the Colorado River was whether the river that carved the Grand Canyon was ancient or comparatively young. Some researchers argued for a canyon born from older drainage systems. Others believed the modern river assembled later, integrating scattered basins into one unstoppable flow. The argument was not academic. It was about whether the canyon represented slow continuity or a dramatic reorganization of an entire region. In other words, was this landscape shaped by persistence or by catastrophe wearing the mask of patience? As the plateau rose, climates changed around it. Ancient seas withdrew. Deserts advanced. Monsoon systems strengthened and weakened. Ice ages far to the north. Altered rainfall, snowpack, and runoff. During wetter eras, rivers surged with greater power. During dry periods, they retreated, narrowed, and left terraces behind like ghost shorelines of former strength. The Colorado was never a simple line on a map. It was a living system responding to planetary mood swings. Each change in temperature, each shift in precipitation, each pulse of sediment from collapsing cliffs altered what the river could do next. In that sense, the canyon was not carved by water alone. It was carved by climate, gravity, tectonics, chemistry, and time itself. Then came another revelation. The Colorado River may not have always reached the sea as we imagine now. Geological evidence suggests that parts of its drainage were once disconnected, trapped in isolated basins, or flowing in different directions. Over immense spans of time, those separated waters linked together. Barriers were breached. Lakes spilled over. Headward erosion ate backward through divides. River systems captured one another. Eventually, a continuous path formed from the Rockies toward the Gulf of California. When that integration happened, the river's power expanded dramatically. It was no longer merely draining local landscapes. It became a continental scalpel, gathering energy across distance and unleashing it into stone. This is where human intuition fails. We picture canyons as static monuments, finished long ago. But the Colorado River teaches the opposite. Landscapes are processes frozen only in the brief stillness of our perception. Even rock is not permanent. It fractures in heat, dissolves in weak acid, collapses under frost, and yields grain by grain to moving water. The canyon walls are not just walls. They are temporary exposures in a system still changing. What seems eternal is actually mid-sentence. The earth is still speaking through cliffs, rapids, landslides, sediment plumes, and vanished channels buried under younger debris. And hidden within that story is a humiliation for our species. For centuries, people looked at the earth and imagined stability. Mountains were symbols of permanence. Deserts looked timeless. Rivers seemed dependable enough to claim, divide, and own. But science revealed something more unsettling. Stability is often only slowness beyond our senses. The Colorado River exists because the ground moved, the climate shifted, and stone surrendered over spans too large for instinct to grasp. It is not proof of permanence. It is proof that change, given enough time, becomes architecture, which raises the darker question. If this river was shaped by forces older than civilization, then what happens when civilization begins trying to shape the river back? By the time human beings entered the Colorado River basin, the canyon country carried the silence of deep time. But people did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived as listeners. For thousands of years, indigenous communities learned the rhythms of this immense and difficult world, when floods would come, where water lingered in stone, which paths crossed the desert without death, which cliffs held shelter, which seasons brought abundance, and which demanded endurance. To them, the river was not merely a resource. It was relation, danger, memory, and law. Long before modern science measured erosion rates or tectonic uplift, human survival here depended on understanding that this land was alive with forces beyond control. That understanding shaped entire worlds. The Colorado and its tributaries nourished settlements, trade routes, fields, ceremonies, and oral traditions across the Southwest. Hohokam irrigation channels turned arid ground into agriculture on a scale. Pueblo societies built in stone and adobe, adapting architecture to heat, wind, and scarcity. Farther north and west, people organized life around canyons, mesas, and seasonal water, treating geography not as scenery, but as destiny. In these landscapes, survival demanded humility. A failed harvest, a prolonged drought, a violent flood, or a shift in river behavior could alter the fate of communities for generations. Civilization here was never separate from geology. It was negotiated with it. Then another force entered the story: empire. Spanish expeditions moved through the region, searching for routes, wealth, converts, and control. Later came Mexican authority. Then the expanding United States, each power projecting fantasies onto a land it barely understood. Maps simplified what reality refused to simplify. The canyon became obstacle, border, symbol, challenge. Yet again and again, the Colorado River punished assumptions. Expeditions were broken by rapids, heat, distance, and terrain so severe it seemed designed to deny passage. Men, trained by war and conquest, discovered that this older landscape cared nothing for ambition. Here, power could not be declared into existence. It had to survive stone, thirst, and current. In the 19th century, the river became a scientific frontier and a national obsession. Explorers, such as John Wesley Powell, descended into the canyon, not only to map it, but to confront a deeper mystery. What kind of nation was trying to expand across a land so dry, so complex, and so geologically overwhelming? Powell saw what many refused to accept. The American West was not simply empty space waiting for settlement. It was a water-limited world, and any civilization built here would depend on a fragile bargain with the river. That warning was profound and inconvenient, and growth preferred optimism. Myth preferred abundance. The river offered neither. So the struggle intensified. Dams rose. Reservoirs spread across drowned canyons. Engineers redirected current, stored floods, generated electricity, and made cities possible in deserts that should never have held millions. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, vast agricultural valleys, industrial corridors, suburbs glowing at night across the heat of the Southwest. Much of this modern world exists because the Colorado River was forced into service. For a time, it seemed like triumph. Humanity had finally reversed the old hierarchy. The ancient river that once carved stone now moved according to gates, turbines, contracts, and political agreements. But this victory carried a hidden fracture. The more civilization depended on the Colorado, the less room the river had to remain what it was. Sediment that once built deltas was trapped behind concrete. Wetlands shrank. Native fish declined. Seasonal pulses were flattened into managed releases. The river's end, once a fertile delta meeting the sea, often became a dry memory. What had taken millions of years to assemble was being reorganized within a century. And now, as drought deepens and heat intensifies, the old warning returns with terrifying clarity. Perhaps the greatest power in this story was never our ability to command the river, but our willingness to forget that it was never truly ours. The deeper truth of the Colorado River is that it was never only a river, it was a system of revelation. It revealed that landscapes are not fixed. It revealed that stone records time better than memory. It revealed that civilizations often mistake temporary control for permanent mastery. And now, in the 21st century, it is revealing something even more unsettling. The ancient forces that shaped this river are colliding with human ambition in real time. What once seemed like a story about the past is becoming a warning about the present. For generations, the dominant myth of modern civilization was simple. Nature was old, but manageable. Rivers could be dammed. Deserts could be greened. Growth could continue. Technology would compensate for scarcity. If a river carried too much water, engineers would tame it. If it carried too little, planners would divide it more efficiently. The Colorado became one of the great monuments to that belief. It was measured, allocated, partitioned, litigated, and transformed into a machine for cities, farms, power grids, and political promises. On paper, it looked rational. In reality, it depended on an illusion. That illusion was abundance. The river had been divided, according to optimistic estimates made during unusually wet periods, as if the strongest version of the Colorado could be counted on forever. But rivers do not sign contracts, and climates do not obey legal agreements. The basin entered a harsher era. Snowpack declined. Heat intensified evaporation. Reservoirs dropped lower, exposing pale mineral bathtub rings around their edges like scars of overconfidence. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, once symbols of national power, began to look like warning beacons. The system was not merely strained. It was revealing how fragile the architecture of the modern Southwest had always been. This is the twist that changes everything. We often imagine that environmental crisis means nature attacking civilization from outside. The Colorado River shows something more disturbing. Civilization built itself inside a dynamic Earth system while pretending that system was stable. The danger is not invasion. It is miscalculation. The same river that made modern life possible in the arid West was always shaped by uncertainty. Shifting runoff, variable climate, ancient drought cycles, changing sediment loads, and geological conditions far older than policy. The crisis feels sudden only because human institutions were built on a timescale too short to understand the forces beneath them. Science sharpened this truth with brutal clarity. Tree ring records, paleoclimate evidence, and long reconstructions of drought revealed that the 20th century had misled us. The historical record used to plan the river was too narrow, too recent, too comfortable. Earlier centuries had seen megadroughts far worse than modern memory. In other words, the Colorado River Basin had always been capable of becoming much drier than the societies depending on it were prepared to imagine. The past was not a gentle backdrop. It was a suppressed warning. And once uncovered, it turned modern confidence into something closer to exposure. That is why this river matters, far beyond the American West. It is not just about water. It is about the human habit of mistaking temporary conditions for eternal truth. It is about our tendency to build civilizations as though the present climate, present flow, present coastlines, and present balances will endure. The Colorado River exposes the flaw in that thinking. The earth is not still. The background is not passive. Deep time does not end when cities appear. It continues beneath them, around them, and eventually through them. And so the real story is no longer only about what the Colorado carved into rock. It is about what it is carving into human consciousness now. The realization that progress without humility is only another form of blindness. The canyon once taught us that Earth was older than myth. The river may now be teaching us that civilization is far more fragile than confidence. In the end, the Colorado River leaves us with a truth far larger than geography. It tells us that what we call the world is only a temporary arrangement between deeper forces. Mountains rise and are broken. Rivers gather and vanish. Climates soften, then harden into eras of thirst. Species flourish, then disappear into stone. Civilizations arrive late to this immense theater and speak as if they own the stage. But the river remembers otherwise. It remembers a planet before cities, before borders, before language itself. And in that memory lies the final implication of this story. Humanity is both astonishing and precarious. That paradox is what makes the Colorado River so powerful. It does not merely reduce us, it redefines us. Yes, our history is brief compared to the canyon walls. Yes, our monuments are fragile beside deep time. Yes, the futures we build can be shaken by drought, heat, and the arithmetic of a river that no longer matches our expectations. But the opposite is also true. Out of all the creatures that ever lived beside ancient water, we are the ones who learn to read the rock, decode the sediments, date the uplift, trace vanished climates, and understand that a canyon is not a wound frozen in time, but a process still unfolding. Our smallness is real. So is our ability to know. That is why this story does not end in despair. It ends in confrontation. The Colorado River forces us to choose what kind of civilization we want to be. One kind sees Earth as inventory, time as irrelevant, and nature as a machine meant to obey demand. The other recognizes limits, studies long patterns, and builds with the humility that ancient systems require. The difference between those visions is not merely political or economic, it is philosophical. It is the difference between seeing ourselves as masters standing above the planet and participants living inside a story that began billions of years before we arrived. The river also changes how we think about survival. We tend to imagine survival as dominance, as expansion, as the power to secure more land, more energy, more certainty. But deep time suggests another definition. Survival belongs not to what is strongest in one moment, but to what can adapt to changing conditions without forgetting reality. Empires often fail because they confuse scale with permanence. The Colorado River has watched that mistake in many forms. Ancient settlements strained by drought, explorers undone by arrogance, modern states dividing water as though mathematics could cancel climate. Again and again, the lesson returns. To survive on an unstable planet, intelligence must become humility in action. And perhaps that is the most unsettling revelation of all. The river that carved one of Earth's greatest wonders is not ancient only in the past tense. It is ancient now. Its story is still happening. The canyon is still eroding. The plateau is still responding to forces below. Snow still falls in the Rockies and may fall differently in the decades to come. Reservoirs still rise and sink according to a climate system growing more unpredictable. Our generation is not standing at the end of the story. We are standing inside a chapter whose consequences are still being written. So when we look at the Colorado River, we are not just looking at water winding through stone. We are looking into a mirror calibrated to a scale almost too vast to bear. It shows us how young we are, how brief our triumphs may be, how dangerous our illusions can become. But it also shows something extraordinary, that a tiny species on one restless planet can stare into deep time and understand, however imperfectly, the immensity surrounding it. And maybe that is where meaning begins. Not in pretending we are eternal, but in knowing we are temporary and choosing to live wisely anyway, for a little while.